You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Holistic Pharmacy Podcast. I'm your host, Marina Buksov, and I'm a functional medicine pharmacist in New York. I'm also a clinical herbalist and an integrative health coach specializing in mindfulness and empowerment. I'm on a mission to transform the way we approach healthcare by bridging the wisdom of traditional medicine with modern practice. And in this podcast, I will be highlighting guests who do just that. I'm constantly inspired by them, and I know you will be as well. Hello and welcome back to the Holistic Pharmacy Podcast. I have an amazing guest today that I met recently in real life, in person in New York City, and I can't wait to share her work with you all. Her name is Keshet. She's an integrative eco-art therapist, systems thinker, and founder of Tevel, a nature-based healing platform advancing collective resilience in the face of ecological and societal disruption. Her work lives in the intersection of eco and trauma-informed psychology, the science of awe, imagination, and living systems. Moore's framework origination has appeared in the Journal of Ecopsychology, Psychology Today, and Biomimicry Institute. Her work contributes to emerging frameworks that integrate emotional literacy, ecological attunement, and systems-level transformation. And really, Moore is just such a wonderful, amazing person to speak to. And we did a little art class in the beginning of a workshop that I attended, and you could see some of the art behind her on the wall. And so I can't wait to get into everything that she does with you all. So Moore, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, really appreciate you coming on. And let's dive in with maybe your background, how you grew up, maybe a little bit about your childhood, if you don't mind sharing, and then what you're currently doing.
Sure. So I was actually born in Israel, kind of an incredible hotspot in more ways than one right now in the world. I was born on a farm. On a small collective farm where my parents grew flowers and onions and cabbage and all sorts of things. And I have very little memory of that period. I was very young. We left Israel when I was 3, and we actually moved to the Philippines for 2 years. And where my father had this contract to bring some of the Israeli agricultural innovation to the Philippines to teach farmers about irrigation and how to channel all of that rainwater that they receive. And we lived in the jungle for 2 years. And I remember feeling very much aligned with the character Mowgli from the Jungle Book. I really, really resonated with Mowgli. In fact, my imaginary friend looked just like Mowgli, and we went through everything together. And then we came to New York on what was supposed to be a visit, and we swapped one jungle for another. And so I really, a few months ago, maybe 6-9 months ago, I learned this term, third culture kid. Someone who is born in one culture, is raised in a different culture, and they don't exactly identify with either. And it really resonates with me, because when I moved back to Israel as an adult, I saw like, wow, I am really different. But I've also really felt that sense of difference living in the States. That's a bit about my childhood. And I always had this like my own personal resonance and my own personal relationship with the natural world. But it wasn't until COVID, it wasn't until 2020 when we were all put into this space that I really started to think about the convergence of the natural world and healing and a psychotherapeutic process, both for individuals and for the collective. And I'm happy to say more about that too.
Yes, for sure. One of my friends and colleagues, Nora Alba, has coined the term in-betweeners. And what you're speaking to is exactly like that, where you don't feel like you fit into any one worldview or culture per se. And it's kind of like drawing from a little bit of everything that you're exposed to. And I think that's how the world is coming to be now, because we're in such a global world at this point. We know that, we're not isolated in these like mono cultures, and even the way that we're growing food, right? It's not supposed to be isolated that way, and it's supposed to be more diverse, and it's healthier when it's more diverse. And that's one of the things that I have come to realize as well in my journey. And learning about herbalism has really been that key for me about understanding where nature is and where we are in the ecosystem, and how to be like concentric, not just centric, where the ego or the person is there in the middle and everything around us exists for us. It's really like we're part of that everything. So yeah, I'm glad that we're speaking to this right off the bat here.
For sure. And I really love that term, in-betweeners, that also really resonates. And I think that having this diverse cultural upbringing and needing from a very young age, needing to learn how to connect with people from all different backgrounds, really informed my, I think, my very real ability to be able to have and create and curate a sense of, contained and mutual safety with people. Again, I mean, just from all sorts of backgrounds, there's always a sense of resonance. And it's something that I'm really grateful for. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I have come from a different country too. I was brought up in Ukraine, and my family is actually Belarusian. And then I moved here to the United States, and I completely resonate with the cross-cultural intersections and how that can add complexity and understanding where you fit in. And at the same time, being in New York City for most of my life at this point, I feel so lucky and blessed that this is a place where all of that sort of clashes, and it's just a multicultural pod, and everybody's very, I think, understanding, and we're all kind of in the same boat where everybody's different, and we're more exposed to different cultures than I think probably any other city, at least in the US. So yeah, it's definitely a different experience to be here compared to anywhere else that you may feel like an in-betweener of sorts.
Sure.
So more, when we met, you explained what your name meant, and that was such a beautiful story. So I'm wondering if you could share that with us as well.
Sure. So more in Hebrew, it's pronounced mor. And so mor or more is the Hebrew for myrrh, which is usually kind of brought together with frankincense and myrrh. But myrrh is an incense that, in ancient biblical times and since has been used as a purifier to purify spaces. And Keshet means rainbow. So I guess my name means like a purifying rainbow. And I don't know if I shared this with you when I met you. An amazing teenage client that I work with that is soon leaving for college. When we first started working together, she was writing me a text, and I happened to see my contact card. I never told her the meaning of my name, but I saw that she had more And then she had the rainbow emoji. And I was like, where, how did that? She was like, I don't know. You just give rainbow. So it was just such a darling way, for me to see that, I really do believe that every name has a story and an essence. And that was really affirming that, that essence had come through to her.
Yeah, that is unbelievable. And I'm looking at you now, and you're wearing these multicolored stripes on your shirt or dress. I don't know. And then you have all these colors around you. So I can totally get the rainbow vibes as well, and just comes through. But I'm wondering whether it was the name or the energy behind the name, or what the story is behind you finding healing work.
Yeah. So my grandfather, my mother's father, was an Auschwitz survivor. He was the only survivor from his family. He was sent to Auschwitz when he was 12, and he came out when he was almost 17. And he was incredible. And yet he was incredibly pained. I mean, really, truly traumatized in ways that, are difficult for us to even begin to imagine. And for as long as I could remember, there were two things that I really, really wanted to understand. I really wanted to understand what one day was like for him, just one day, because he couldn't really emote about it. He couldn't really talk about it. He would have horrible night terrors. But he couldn't really talk about it. It was apparent. It was apparent in the way he would shovel food. And it was so pained. So I always really wanted to know what one day was like for him. And then I also really wanted to know kind of what separates people and communities from just surviving to really thriving. That was something that just really fascinated me. And, in Judaism, there's this premise of tikkun olam, to repair the world, right? And I've just always had this very innate desire to reinstate some sense of healing, of repair. I think that coming epigenetically and intergenerationally from just such profound trauma, which has absolutely shown up in my life in more ways than one, both directly, both genetically, both, just so many different kinds of expressions of that trauma, just this really innate desire to tip the scales, and into a place of healing, of some restored sense of justice and repair. And it's something that I started engaging with, since I was like 12, very early on. I was growing up in the late 80s and early 90s when the AIDS epidemic was ravaging so many different communities, and communities that were different from my own, largely at the time, it was called the gay community, underprivileged communities, disproportionately to Black and brown people. And I started volunteering and learning about, becoming a peer AIDS educator, and became very, very involved in that space. So it's just kind of been this innate thing since I was very young. Yeah.
Wow, that was a lot to unpack. And I'm glad that you mentioned the epigenetic and cross-generational and the lineage and the imprint that the trauma one generation has to deal with then passes down. Yeah, and it does definitely carry on until we decide to dismantle it. And one of the ways, as you mentioned, could be to actually talk about it and share the burden and allow it to be seen, that pain to be seen, really, because when we keep it, hidden and create more shame around it of some sort or any other negativity, then that could really constrain us. So Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's applicable in one way or another across generations and across anybody listening to this podcast. Whether or not you know your family history well, it seems like every generation had more trauma than the one after it. And if you believe it or not, I think like we've been born into maybe a better world than other generations before us. Now, of course, we have a lot that we see and are exposed to, and violence and wars going on right now as we speak that are continued from ancient times, some of them. But in general, we don't have to fight for our survival as much, I feel like, as some of our previous generations and our ancestors. So it just always reminds me to be grateful and thankful to be here now in this time and have a lot more privilege than people before us, generations before us. A lot more access to information and education around these things, and healers like yourself who are doing the work to unmantle and dismantle some of these burdens.
Absolutely. And with that privilege, I happen to believe comes responsibility. I am really privileged in many ways. I'm in this safe place. I don't have to worry about clean water. I don't have to worry about, sewage. I don't have to worry about so many things. I have whole foods that I can eat. All of more than my basic needs are met. And we're coming up, in this generation. I agree with you that in many, many ways, this, as with all the hardship, the world has absolutely grown and developed. And, it's so much yes and, because there are systems that are really broken and erosive and damaging in so many different ways. And it's kind of amazing working with young people who have such nuanced understanding of family dynamics and intergenerational dynamics and coping skills and, just all of these things. So I happen to believe that with all of that privilege does come great responsibility. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to use that not only to benefit your own self-care, your own healing, but we are so intricately connected, into this cosmic matrix of life. What are you going to do with that? Because what happens to you affects me and vice versa, all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you more. So I'm curious, how do you approach this in your work, in your healing work, in your therapy, what you mentioned about nature and what you do with art? How do you connect all of these worlds together?
Sure. So I've been an art therapist since 2005. And ever since I became an art therapist, I've worked with people who've had really overwhelming experiences. So in New York City, with homeless, mentally ill, chemically addicted adults, the folks on the street that for many people are quite invisible, right? I worked with women who survived sex trafficking and families who were in severe crisis and refugee children. So it was always really clear to me, these were complex problems. These were really complex systems and situations from which these human beings emerged. And what I was seeing in the present moment was the outcome of a really complex experience. So it was clear to me that there was no one size fits all, and that this really required an integrative process. So pretty early on, the way that I would approach clinical work was integrative. Art therapy, always the nucleus. It is the nucleus because I believe wholeheartedly that the creative process and our species' singular way of expressing our experience, expressing and sublimating what it is that we have experienced can actually heal the greatest ills of our time. So art therapy was always the nucleus. And then, these other kind of fields started to converge of trauma-informed psychology and somatics and mindfulness, right? And then when COVID came along and we were all here, I saw with folks, because I was continuing to work with people who had experienced what is known as complex trauma or acute trauma, right? Just overwhelming experiences, that they were even more dissociated. And, because all of those identity feeding, work, school, just moving about the world, they were gone. So I just kind of on a whim, I suggested that we should meet in the park. And I didn't change anything. I brought supplies with me, and I brought beach chairs, and we just sat under trees instead of a ceiling. And everything changed, Marina. I saw people's narratives, right? Trauma can kind of close up the perception and the lens, and we can get very binary, very black and white in how we see things in our worldview. I saw that start to open up, and I saw people's sense of self start to open up. I basically started to see consciousness expansion and resourcing. And I was like, I'm not changing anything. This is incredible. What is happening? And I started doing research and learning about eco-psychology and ecotherapy, and more specifically eco-art therapy, and became more intentional about it. So the primary way, really, there's three primary ways to bring all of this together, right? Like in thinking about nature as a co-creator or a co-therapist, which is an absurd thing to say because we in no way compare, right? I say that with great humility and awareness of my modesty before the natural world, but that we create either in the natural world, as inspired by the natural world, or borrowing from the natural world, with materials or through metaphor, ideally all three. And it's kind of just this really organic process, right? That over the last 6 years of just developing all different kinds of directives that are nature-based, like really focusing on your nature ally, all different kinds of meditations that are about the natural world, just different things that we make with natural materials. So many different ways that I'm happy to talk about more.
Yes, I would love to dive a little bit deeper. I'm always like a big picture thinker. And when I see the state of the world, and obviously a lot of us can probably pinpoint some of the problems. And then there's the question of, well, what is the solution, right? And we can talk all day. We can talk for decades. We can talk for centuries about the problems, but what's actually going to help us move forward? And so in your work, I'm wondering if there anything that you can share with us on an individual level that we can be doing to help our own expansion of consciousness and to be in service to the world. And then also, is there anything collectively that you would wish for the world to be doing?
Yeah. So it's almost one and the same for both. I really tend to view things on a relational field. And this whole framework that I've been developing is all about humans' broken attachment to the natural world and thereby ourselves, right? Through this onset of capitalism and, just the Anthropocene, human acute and systemic impact on the planet, where we have reversed our connection with the natural world and we have othered it so intensely, so pathologically, that it's just objectified, right? The tree is no longer a tree, it's lumber. The cow is no longer a cow, it's a beef steak. The mountain is no longer a mountain, it's copper. Like it's just all resources for extraction. That through that systemic severing of our attachment to the natural world, we have and destabilizing of Gaia, of the planet, right? Dysregulating the planet, we have so dysregulated ourselves, right? And we see this by an epidemic of despair, of loneliness, of addiction, of numbness, of nihilism, just all of the woes, all of the problems, in my view, really come from this just like pervasive detaching from the natural world and really ourselves and each other, right? So in my view, any opportunity, this is not just like about taking a walk. That's great. That's wonderful to take a walk. It's really to shift your orientation. Like to really, I really believe that if individuals and families and communities and regions and culture, this is cultural repair, starting with one person and moving from the dyad to the group, that if we begin to really shift our orientation to step outside and see that we are surrounded by kin rather than resource, like truly kin, from the teeny tiny that is under our feet, the subterranean, to these giants that stand above us. And if we are able to do that, if we're able to transmit and make art about it, which we then internalize and integrate and expand our own sense of self as, becoming an ecological self rather than just more Keshet walking about, right? That, wow, oh my God, I'm part of something so much vaster, so much more powerful than just one human being. We will become incredibly resourced and we can really heal. I hope that makes sense in terms of
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I know it's a complex question. And I love what you said about the art piece of it. And I've always thought that artists were the original social commentators and visionaries and really sharing maybe what an ideal world is, or maybe what a different perspective is on something, or pointing something out in a new way that people can resonate with. And I totally agree with you about everything that we're seeing with the ecology and the environment and what we've done by an extractive system and capitalistic system. And then now that being mirrored back to us by our bodies and by our psyches and our mental health and our social health and our physical health, with all the chronic illnesses that I see, and all the innovation in the world, all the herbs and supplements and technologies and gene editing is not going to help us. That's truly what I believe. And it's really what you're talking about. And reimagining what a more symbiotic relationship would look like, I think that's the answer. And that's where I personally believe we should all be focusing our time and attention and resources into. And so my next question to you is, how do we invite people into this work gently rather than maybe like making them feel guilty or shame them for the old ways?
Totally. I think that is such an important question. And it's something that I've discussed with other folks in the climate community, like the environmental activist community. There has been way too much emphasis on shame. And especially when we are not responsible for this crisis or this poly crisis, it doesn't matter how much I recycle. That's not right. Like it's not about that. So it's not about like you shouldn't, or maybe you should do this differently. It's really about what you have to gain, from shifting your orientation to living. This is like an orientation shift. What do you have to gain, if you are really struggling with anxiety, if you are really struggling with depression, if you are really struggling with intergenerational trauma? What can this relational shift do for that? How can that help you in the language of, the Huberman manosphere, how can you optimize your life? This can really help optimize your life. This can really help empower you to become, like, to shift your inner architecture. I think that if we lean on that, on what people have to gain from this orientation shift, and and even leaning on science and learning about what the experience of awe actually does to the mind, what that does to the default mode network, what that does for our executive functioning, for our sense of focus and clarity and well-being, right? So there's just so much to gain that has nothing to do with guilt and shame. And then so you show up at the grocery counter more resourced, more kind, more regulated. And so you help those in your immediate surroundings inherently become more regulated. And it just has this ripple effect of inadvertently spreading goodness, right?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for those examples. I think that's important to name. And another question came to mind as you were speaking. We met at a psychedelic book signing and journalism mini event. So I'm curious what your perspective is on the role of psychedelics or other substances that change perhaps our consciousness. Does that have a role in your work, or do you see it having a role in this type of work?
So it's interesting that you ask. I remember having a conversation with Marissa Feinberg, the founder of Psychedelics for Climate Action, about how I was a psychedelic person before I ever tried any kind of psychedelic. And I really view this work as being incredibly psychedelic. This is really consciousness shifting and consciousness expanding. I think it's a really nuanced conversation, and it all comes down to intention, right? It all comes down to intention. What am I wanting to embody here? And there's a really big difference, and people are adults, and they do things responsibly and hopefully safely. If it's to have a really great time, listen, everybody needs to feel good, I suppose. But I do think that, there are absolutely plant medicines that can help people in a really accelerated way. If they don't have access to working with someone like you or someone like me, if they're able to access an opportunity to engage in a consciousness expanding experience, and there is an intention to connect with transcendence, with the cosmic matrix of life, and they are then able to, post experience, set an intention to integrate that into the culture of their life, then I think it can really accelerate that. I do. My biggest concern with psychedelics is that they're not done with reverence. And they're kind of becoming, people are live streaming themselves on and live streaming their like bots. It's very bizarre what's happening. So as these are plant medicines, these are sacred experiences. You're wanting to connect with a sacred state. There needs to be a foundational reverence for that experience, for it to have integrity. That's my view. Yeah.
Yeah, as an herbalist, I completely agree. And one of my teachers, Sam Perry, says that we take the soil out of the experience in like the current modern way that a lot of people engage with psychedelics. It's like you're taking the context out. You're taking that ceremony and the tradition and the reverence, as you stated, out, and then you're just trying to engage with it in like a clinical, chemical based model, whether you're doing it in a clinical setting or not. That's how most of us, I think, tend to think about it or are taught to think about it. And so that definitely changes the perspective and experience or it may affect it in some way. We can't say for sure. Of course, many people probably have profound experiences either way. And like you said, you don't even need to take any physical mind altering substances to get a shift in consciousness. You can totally tap into it in other ways. So my final sort of complex question for you is, how do we make sure we're not following the same exact extractive model when we are doing things in a more intentional, holistic, integrative way going forward? How do we make sure we build better structures? How do we opt out of like the same models of, ordering from Amazon, the company, and not saving Amazon, the amazing birthplace of many plants and medicines?
What an important question. What a big question. I think that there are two primary ingredients for that to happen. And I think that they are humility and respect. And pause. In this click and consume culture where everything is so easy and so accessible, and that has a timeline that is not going. It's this comfort convenience culture is not going to last forever, and that's something that people need to start to reconcile. This is a finite place. There are finite limits to the biophysical. It's to pause. And with humility and respect and reverence, to ask yourself, is this essential? Is this truly essential? And who does it benefit? And for how long? Right? I mean, there's the 7 generations rule, which we've gained from the indigenous cultures of this world. And in many cultures, right? There's stories in the Torah of planting a tree that you in your life are not going to see the fruit, but your descendants will. So I think that stopping and pausing as much as possible and asking yourself with humility and reverence and respect, whom does this benefit and for how long? And is it essential? If it's not essential, what am I hoping to gain from this? Am I looking to soothe some kind of discomfort? Am I looking to fill some vacancy? Has that even worked for me in the past? Does it actually sustain that vacancy? If not, then maybe I actually need to start to engage in some meaning formation in my life. Something far deeper and more expansive. And with that, going back to your earlier question about the guilt and the shame, it's very, very hard to exist in 2026 in this time and place and not participate in harmful systems. It's really challenging. We can mitigate the harm, I think, by a lot in asking ourselves just those few questions and shifting the stance to that place of humility and foresight. Like what I do now is going to impact for a long time. So let me pause and think about that.
Wow, thank you so much. This was such an insightful conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I have recently written about the 7-generation principle. If anybody listening wants to go check out my blog, marinabooksstuff.com, and more. If you just have 2 more minutes, I'd love to do a rapid fire round with you.
Oh my gosh, sure. That sounds fun.
All right. The first question I ask everybody is, what would you say to somebody looking to improve their quality of life right now?
Go outside and commune with the tree. Ask it for advice. If there is a question that you are really pondering, I know this sounds woo-woo, but it's not. Go outside and ask the tree your question. I am telling you, you will get a response.
Love that. Thank you. Yes. Everybody, you can try this at home. It's safe to do that. Doctor approved. All right. Question 2. What is your favorite meal to either cook or to eat?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. This is supposed to be rapid fire. I really love to make shakshuka.
I know that. Yeah.
I love to make shakshuka. It's basically, you roast peppers and onions and tomato sauce and, lots of really savory spices. You have cumin and paprika and hot pepper and jalapeno. And then and that simmers for a long time. And then you poach eggs on top. It's just delicious and comforting and multi-seasonal.
Yeah, it's a great dish.
Yeah.
Love it, love it. And then last question, what's your favorite hobby or maybe a fun fact about yourself that many people may not know about?
I love to dance so much. I love, love, love to dance. I don't think I'm a great dancer. I don't think I'm particularly graceful, but I love to dance both by myself, with my kids, in a club, in any kind of on the beach, in the grocery aisle. I love to dance. I think it is just such a great way to move energy through our body. It just feels so good.
Yes,
Yeah.
fellow dancer over here. And
Yay.
anybody can be a great dancer, ecstatic/interpretive. That's what we'll call it. So love that.
Totally.
All right, Moore. So please share with our listeners how they can get in touch, learn more, and support your work.
Amazing. So my website is my name. So it's www.morekeshet.com, MORKESHET.com. You can find my links for my Instagram there. It's More Keshet Art Therapist. On my website, there are so many free resources for you to engage with. Rituals, devotional love ritual, a deep earth-centered gratitude ritual, all of these opportunities for you to experience this work of bringing together connection with the natural world, your inner psyche with your creativity, and this just like abundant, profound sense of interconnection. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have all of that in the show notes. And I downloaded a few of those myself and highly recommend everybody go and check it out. And Moore, thank you again so much for your time. And I hope to speak again soon. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Holistic Pharmacy Podcast, and I truly hope you enjoyed the show. If you learned something useful in this episode, please consider giving the show a 5-star rating and a sincere review so that more people can find it, or share it with a friend directly. To get in touch with me, you can find me on social media by looking up my name, Marina Buksov, or email me at marina@rawfork.com. Take good care and see you soon.